Welcome everyone. So let's get started. We'll start with a few notes on our Trend Resource Center, and then we'll dive into our newest indicator of consumer behavior, the ADARA Consumer Vitality Index. So for those of you who aren't familiar with ADARA, you might wonder where our data comes from. We have over 270 consumer brands that share their data with us, including United, Marriott, and Singapore Airlines in the travel sector. We also have dining and event data due to partnerships with platforms such as OpenTable and Ticketmaster, and social gathering data from contributors including Evite and Punchbowl. We also have real estate data as part of our home buyer consortium, with data coming from Century 21, Coldwell Banker, and Remax, just to name a few. All these sources come together to form one of the richest multidimensional databases of consumer behavior on the market. As an example, within travel, we see typically over 14 billion searches a year and almost 1 billion air and hotel bookings. And we've been able to get quite detailed on transaction behavior, as most of our 1 billion consumer profiles have on average about 30 data points per profile. We have our trend data available on our website. It's organized by region, US, EMEA, and APAC. You'll see the URL here so you can access the data yourself. We do update it daily, so check back often for the latest trends. And these insights have been developed by my team in field data science. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to us. We're very interested in talking to you about your custom reports and insights needs. And you'll find it very easy to get in touch with us by clicking that purple request button on the right. And again, if you do have any questions for us, please go ahead and put them in the chat box in Zoom. So today we're going to dive into our newest indicator, the Consumer Vitality Index. So I'm sure many of you track consumer sentiment across a number of different sources, such as surveys, government publications. We at ADARA felt that what's missing, we're able to pull from our differentiated set of consumer profiles, especially in these challenging COVID times, is a score that accounts for both the financial resources individuals have at their disposal, as well as the willingness to participate in group settings, to be physically close to others, whether that is at restaurants, shops, or on planes. So as you've just seen, we are able to pull together data across multiple verticals from travel, as well as dining, entertainment, and housing. So we've been able to aggregate those dimensions into a single score that reflects intent behavior, as well as the actual purchase, the financial commitment to that activity. By looking at search and booking activity for activities that by necessity put people in contact with one another, we can quantify how comfortable individuals are to be out in public. So here's a chart. It's a little bit, can be a little bit overwhelming at first glance, so I'm gonna walk you through it, right? So we've taken 5 dimensions of our data and grouped them. Travel in magenta color, real estate that comprises home buying and renovation activity in light green, dining in purple, live entertainment events in turquoise, and social gatherings, things like birthday parties and baby showers, in orange. We've grouped this activity by week and indexed each week to the first normal week of the year, the week ending January 12th, which is the first column on the left. It is exactly at the 100 mark. That's the basis for the index. There's a column for every week of the year up until the week ending 20th September. And I've also added some indication of different analytical periods, which I've shaded in alternating white and gray, which includes the pre-COVID period up to about 15th of March, the COVID period mid-March to beginning of May, what I call the initial post-COVID period, which is May through July, and then the current period, which is August and after. So we're looking at 2 things here: the volume of activity, which is the height on the column, and the composition of each column, reflecting which types of activity have been most prevalent. If you look at the pre-COVID period from early January into March, again shaded in light gray, you can see that the index was high, mostly over 100. The predominant components of the index during that time was travel and live events. Most of the upward movement in the index was driven by real estate over that period, and a little bit by dining as well. Of course, good question here. So the question is, why is COVID defined as ending in May? It's very much still happening, and it's worse now in many places than it was in April and May. I just simply selected a label which I felt was appropriate for that period of time, which is, the first, let's call it first COVID, if you will. I think that is a period of time in which COVID was taking hold, and therefore is probably the period of the most dramatic change in user behavior activity. So of course, when COVID hit in March, the area without the shading, there was a rapid decrease in the overall index. It dropped down to a level of about 21, about a fifth of the activity compared to early January. Real estate, which is in the light green again, continues to perform well relative to the other categories. In fact, it performs relatively better than the pre-COVID period, where travel was significantly reduced and events and dining became essentially non-existent. There's not even a trace of blue or purple within that period of time that would indicate that activity, and the purple doesn't come back until late May, realistically. The index bounces around the 30 mark from mid-March until early April, when there was a big bump up to 50 driven by real estate. I've also shaded the period from that mid-May to the end of July in gray and labeled its initial post-COVID, just as a label for that period of time. So this is the period in which we start to see signs of life in different categories. So in fact, the overall levels are comparable to the COVID period. But while during COVID, real estate activity predominated, we could see balanced growth across a number of the different categories. So travel for one, the activity there increased from its COVID lows, with a minor peak during that period of, say, around mid-June. We see a considerable pickup in dining activity, and social gatherings also reach its relative peak post-COVID. Entering the current period, which is the area shaded in not shaded, it's in white, the predominant trend is real estate to the forefront. At the beginning of the year, real estate comprised between about 10 and 15% of the index, compared to the current period, where activity averages about 45%, comprises about 45% of the total. In relative as well as in absolute terms, real estate activity is higher than at the beginning of the year, which is driving some heightened activity in the index overall. During the most recent peak after beginning of the year, which is around 6th of January, it's at a level of 89. So say about 90% of the first week of the year. Looking at some of the other categories, travel has assumed a pattern of pretty consistent weekly activity at a level a bit higher than the COVID depths, but not yet approaching its pre-COVID heights. Dining, on the other hand, has demonstrated a slowly persistent upward motion in recent weeks. I think it'll be interesting to see how this activity changes in the coming months as the balance between indoor and outdoor dining activity shifts with the weather and ever-evolving COVID situation. Finally, noting that the one category of activity that has negligible signs of life is live events. Perhaps not particularly surprising, almost all pre-existing events have been canceled, and there's not a ton of planning for new ones, and that's probably that situation will probably continue for the foreseeable future. So the next part of what I want to discuss is looking at some of this index activity broken down by US region. Some of these charts will look same-ish to what we're seeing right here, but we do see some differentiated trends of activity by region. So let's start with the Northeast. So, and I'm going to focus on that peak activity around 6th September and try to draw that direct attention there to try to draw the trend and contrast it to what's happening at the beginning of the year. So looking at the Northeast, the September 6th peak was about 120% of week one activity. Travel's composition of that peak was relatively low, 10 to 17% overall. Sorry, a second here, 10 to 17% overall. What activity displaces travel? It's real estate. It's a dominating activity during that peak. 68%, about 68% of that, 68% of activity. And also noteworthy is the progress of dining activity during the peak pre-COVID week of February 16. The value there is about 2.1, whereas the most recent week of activity of the week ending September 20th is about 1.4, which is about 66% of the 2020 peak. In the Midwest, focusing again on that 6th September week, that is about 150% of week one activity. The driver of this peak, again, is real estate. That's about 71% of the activity for that week. That comes at the expense compared to previous weeks of a little bit of dining, a little bit of travel, some live events. Also noting that the recent heightened activity in the most recent week was driven in the week ending September 20th was driven by real estate. That's 61% of index activity. Out west, where that 6th September peak is about 120% of week one activity. Real estate is about 61% of the activity for that week. If activity in the most recent week of September 20th does not appear as robust compared to some of the other regions and also compared to some of the previous week's activity, that's because real estate activity wasn't as strong during the most recent week. Finally, last but not least, let's close out with the South, where the same peak of within September 6th week was about 120% of week one. And activity in the most recent week ending September 20th was about the same level as week one. Again, unsurprisingly, driven by real estate, which comprises 63% of the activity on the week of September 6th. Also noting that travel activity is relatively higher than in other regions, whereas dining activity is lower. I have another question from, is there a distinction between in-dining or takeout? Probably not. Data is category based. This is all in restaurant activity. So this is not takeout. This is all dining within restaurants. So another question we have, asking about year-on-year measurement of activity. We do have some views on that, depending on the category of activity. That's something that we could try to explore and dig in further in another conversation. So I think it'd be very interesting to explore what the trends are in these different categories year on year. Also, closing out this discussion on the focus on consumer vitality before we look at some of the travel activity, just highlighting here that just some concluding thoughts on consumer spending activity. Clearly, in the situation of COVID, there's been the situation has catalyzed dramatic shifts in consumer spending activity. While certain categories like travel, live events, and dining have been definitely negatively effective, mostly because of the perceived feasibility of these activities. Certain categories, specifically dining, has demonstrated a persistent trend of recovery over the last few weeks. I think the headline story here is that the real estate category activity level is multiples higher than at the beginning of the year. And a more dynamic recent real estate market, coupled with limited alternative options for discretionary spend in other areas, may drive related expenditure, consumer expenditure in areas such as, say, home improvement. So one last, so noting that in the coming weeks, we will be posting this index as part of our trends to the website. So you're welcome to check back to see how consumers' behavior is progressing over time.